When a rookie quarterback steps into a locker room beside Deshaun Watson and his $230 million contract, standard NFL instinct dictates you mark your territory, fight for every practice rep, and incite a media firestorm. Yet, the second Shedeur Sanders walked into the building, he did something far more dangerous. He completely refused to fight. Every talking head primed the public for an explosive QB controversy, expecting Shedeur to throw gas on the flames. But he recognized a lethal truth that eludes most young star athletes. Publicly waging war against a $230 million ghost like Watson is a trap you lose the moment you step into the ring. Instead of falling into the ego trap of immediate conflict, Shedeur executed a calculated masterclass in emotional intelligence, disarming the quarterback room and seamlessly transferring every ounce of crushing expectation back onto the veteran incumbent. By intentionally stepping out of the media spotlight to build a collaborative apprenticeship, he bought himself the ultimate off-field cheat code to grow, adapt, and dismantle the system from the inside out, while everyone else was waiting for a war that never came. To understand why this tactical retreat is actually an aggressive strategic move, one must first dismantle the illusion of the open quarterback competition. In the modern NFL, money dictates leverage, and leverage dictates opportunity. When an organization guarantees nearly $250 million to a single athlete, every executive, coach, and owner in that building is psychologically and financially tied to that player's success. For a rookie to enter that environment and posture as the immediate usurper creates instant operational friction. It forces the front office into a defensive posture, puts the coaching staff on edge, and turns every incomplete pass in May into a line item audit of the franchise's long-term decision-making. Most young quarterbacks, driven by the intense self-belief that got them drafted, fall into the trap of matching that pressure with equal force. They issue subtle media digs, display body language that signals frustration during second-team reps, and allow their camp to feed anonymous quotes to beat writers about fair opportunities. But shadowboxing a legacy attached to that level of capital is a losing proposition. If you lose the public battle, you are labeled immature, entitled, or uncoachable. If you create enough chaos to win the public battle, you inherit a fractured locker room, an anxious coaching staff, and a fan base conditioned to turn on you the moment you throw your first multi-interception game. Shedeur's immediate recognition of this dynamic reveals a level of political and psychological literacy rarely seen in first-year signal callers. Rather than viewing Watson's presence and contract as a barrier, he reframed it as an operational shield. By publicly and privately treating Watson not as an adversary to be dethroned, but as a senior peer to be observed, Shedeur neutralized the media's primary source of engagement. Sports media thrives on conflict, asymmetric tension, and perceived slights. By offering complete diplomatic neutrality, Shedeur starved the news cycle of its required fuel. The quarterback controversy narrative collapsed before it could take root, not because the media lost interest, but because one side of the conflict simply refused to participate. This subversion goes deeper than mere media training or public relations management. It is a fundamental recalibration of power dynamics within a high-stress workplace. In psychological terms, when an incumbent authority figure senses an incoming threat, their default posture shifts to self-preservation, control, and territorial defense. In an NFL quarterback room, that translates to guarded film sessions, minimal mentorship, and a subtle wall built between the veteran and the rookie. By explicitly signaling that he was not competing against Watson's current standing or historical legacy, Shedeur disarmed the veteran's natural defensiveness. Consequently, the rookie transformed what could have been a hostile, micromanaged environment into a safe operational space. He gained unmonitored access to Watson's processing habits, defensive pre-snap reads, and veteran coping mechanisms without having to trade his own immediate reputation to get them. The shadow of a $230 million contract, which typically crushes the development of an incoming rookie forced to compete against it, instead became a massive umbrella holding off the rain of immediate public judgment. Ultimately, the paradox of shadow boxing a legacy lies in understanding where true leverage comes from. True power in the modern NFL is not grabbed through posturing during press conferences or forcing early, low-efficiency starts on a transitioning roster. True power is built silently through strategic patience, systematic absorption of the system, and allowing time to dismantle the obstacles ahead of you. Shedeur Sanders did not concede the starting job out of deference or lack of ambition. He bypassed an unwinnable psychological war to ensure that when his time on the field inevitably arrives, he inherits a stable foundation rather than the radioactive fallout of a self-inflicted quarterback controversy. Disarming a quarterback room is an exercise in high-stakes social engineering, and the micro-interactions between Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson during joint workouts and practice reps offer a masterclass in how body language can alter power dynamics. In traditional NFL training camp environments, where an incumbent starter feels under siege, practice reps become territorial skirmishes. Young quarterbacks typically assert themselves through aggressive posture, standing squarely in the center of the throw net, pacing impatiently while the starter takes reps, or exhibiting cold, distant, nonverbal cues during film review. Shedeur intentionally inverted every single one of those alpha tropes. When observing practice footage and off-season workouts, what stands out is not an intense rivalry, but a carefully calibrated body language of collaborative apprenticeship. Shedeur can be seen standing adjacent to Watson, not behind him in a posture of looming pressure, but parallel, mirroring his dropbacks, tracking his progression reads, and instantly engaging in dialogue the moment Watson steps off the field. Rather than attempting to steal the spotlight or signal to cameras that he is ready to claim the throne, Shedeur frames every interaction around open inquiry. He asks Watson specific questions about pre-snap leverage and boundary safety rotations, actively soliciting advice in full view of teammates and coaches. This subtle behavioral shift radically alters how Watson perceives him. Shedeur ceases to be a predator waiting for a mistake and becomes an eager student validating the veteran's expertise. This deliberate framing of the relationship as an apprenticeship creates an immediate wave of psychological safety within the quarterback room, a space historically known as one of the most paranoid pressure cookers in professional sports. When a high-priced veteran feels threatened by an incoming passer, the meeting room becomes a cold, transactional environment where knowledge is guarded like state secrets. Threatened starters rarely share the subtle pre-snap cheats, defensive tear recognition, or cadence tricks that take years to master in the NFL. Instead, they retreat into quiet self-preservation. By publicly abdicating any desire to force an immediate takeover, Shedeur dismantled Watson's natural defensive barriers. Relieving that existential pressure of the veteran QB completely altered the operational dynamic during film sessions. Instead of a tense room filled with passive-aggressive silence and guarded answers, the atmosphere shifted into an open, collaborative seminar. Watson, no longer needing to protect his territory against a rookie trying to undermine him, is empowered to take on the role of the revered elder statesman. He can freely point out coverage disguise nuances, share how he processes complex blitz packages, and critique Shedeur's footwork without worrying that giving away his secrets will directly accelerate his own benching. The strategic brilliance of generating this psychological safety is that it accelerates the rookie's intellectual development at a rate standard competitive environments simply cannot match. Physical traits like arm strength and quick release can be honed on the field, but mastering the mental speed of an NFL offense requires access to raw, unvarnished veteran wisdom. By disarming Watson, Shedeur gained an all-access pass to years of high-level processing experience without having to pay the heavy tax of trial and error mistakes on game days. He essentially turned his primary competitor into his most dedicated personal coach, absorbing real-time tactical feedback every time they step out of the film room. Furthermore, this collaborative dynamic permeates the entire offense. Offensive linemen, wide receivers, and skill players no longer feel forced to pick a side or navigate awkward locker room factions between the veteran and the young talent. The entire offensive unit operates with a sense of cohesion because the quarterback room itself projects unified harmony rather than chaotic division. Shedeur's ability to diffuse a potentially explosive workplace dynamic through deliberate humility and strategic empathy proves that true command of a football team begins long before a player ever calls a play in the huddle. It begins by quietly controlling the room. The core mechanic of the shadow advantage lies in the systematic transfer of existential pressure. When a highly touted quarterback arrives in a market hungry for long-term stability, the default instinct of sports media and fan bases is to immediately crown him the franchise savior. If the young passer leans into that hype and postures as the rightful heir apparent, he inadvertently draws a giant bullseye on his own back. Every missed throw in August, every slow pre-snap read in joint practices, and every developmental mistake becomes microanalyzed through the unforgiving lens of immediate starter expectations. By explicitly refusing to claim that mantle and publicly deferring to Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders pulled off a strategic maneuver. He redirected the full weight of media scrutiny, contract pressure, and weekly expectation back onto the veteran incumbent. Watson must perform under the crushing visibility of a $250 million deal, physical recovery, and relentless public judgment, while Shedeur operates in the relative quiet of the operational shadows. This structural insulation grants a young signal caller the rarest luxury in modern professional sports, the space to refine his mechanics and mental processing without the toxic noise of immediate panic. NFL history demonstrates that the quarterbacks who build sustainable, multi-decade legacies rarely begin their careers by waging political warfare in their own building. Consider how Patrick Mahomes navigated his rookie campaign under Alex Smith in Kansas City. Smith was an established, highly productive veteran who carried the weekly burden of taking the hits and leading a playoff team every Sunday. Mahomes did not launch subtle media campaigns or posture for immediate starting reps. Instead, he embraced the shadow advantage, absorbing the offense, observing how an elite pro handles game week preparation, and sharpening his processing out of the public eye. Similarly, Aaron Rodgers sat behind Brett Favre in Green Bay, enduring years of external media speculation while quietly rebuilding his mechanics and mastering pre-snap leverage under the radar. In both instances, the young quarterback allowed the high-priced veteran to take the physical bruises and press conference fire, using that buffer to build an impenetrable foundation. When the transition inevitably occurred, Mahomes and Rodgers stepped onto the field not as anxious rookies trying to validate their draft position, but as fully developed decision makers operating with total system mastery. Conversely, the league's history is littered with the wreckage of young quarterbacks caught in disastrous, immediate conflict scenarios. When an incoming passer or his inner circle actively agitates for power, demanding immediate starts, feeding locker room grievances to beat writers, or engaging in a public tug-of-war with an incumbent, the entire offensive structure destabilizes. Time and again, talented young signal callers have been thrust onto the field before their processing speed matched NFL tempo, forced to execute simplified offenses while trying to command a fractured, politically divided locker room. The outcome is almost universally developmental stagnation, shattered confidence, and a premature career spiral. Shedeur's commitment to off-field patience is elite risk management. By allowing Watson to remain the lightning rod for organizational tension, Shedeur guarantees that when his moment on the field arrives, he will step into the huddle not as an instigator who forced a messy workplace coup, but as the fully prepared, steady, and inevitable leader of the team. Managing the insatiable appetite of a modern sports fan base and local media apparatus requires a masterclass in narrative diffusion. In an era dominated by 24-hour sports talk radio, algorithmic outrage, and localized beat coverage hungry for daily headlines, a high-profile rookie quarterback is an instant commodity. The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped into the building alongside Deshaun Watson, the local media ecosystem had its story pre-written. The aging, high-priced, controversial veteran being hunted by the charismatic, famous, highly skilled young heir. In standard scenarios, the rookie unwittingly feeds this machine. A cryptic post on social media, a subtle eyebrow raise during a press conference when asked about backup reps, or a passive-aggressive comment about wanting to compete immediately is all a hungry media market needs to turn a routine week of training camp into a full-blown QB controversy. Once that narrative takes root, it metastasizes into the locker room, forcing teammates to answer awkward daily questions and disrupting the weekly operational focus required to win high-stakes games. Shedeur's subversion of this dynamic was as immediate as it was effective. By publicly refusing to engage in posturing, systematically deflecting questions about starting timelines, and showering Watson with consistent, explicit respect, he effectively starved the local media of its primary fuel. You cannot build a daily conflict narrative when one of the main characters openly and consistently refuses to act as an antagonist. When beat writers pressed him on his desire to take the starting job, Shedeur didn't offer empty corporate cliches. He offered genuine, calculated, diplomatic deflections that reframed his presence as an asset to Watson rather than a threat. By systematically lowering the temperature in the press room, he removed a massive source of background noise for the entire organization. The coaching staff no longer had to spend Tuesday press conferences managing political optics. The offensive coordinator didn't have to navigate public pressure regarding rep distribution, and the team could maintain its weekly focus on game preparation rather than crisis management. What the broader sports landscape often fails to realize is that this disciplined, high-road approach yields a far more potent long-term result. It builds a deeply authentic, unbreakable, grassroots relationship with the fan base. Modern sports fans are increasingly fatigued by immediate self-aggrandizement and manufactured player drama. While a rookie shouting from the rooftops about his readiness might generate a few viral clips and quick applause from the loudest corners of the internet, it also creates an incredibly fragile foundation. The moment that same vocal rookie throws two fourth-quarter interceptions, the fan base turns on him with equal velocity, viewing his prior confidence as unearned arrogance. By contrast, an elite young athlete demonstrating calculated patience, self-awareness, and respect for the team's hierarchy earns a profound level of institutional trust. The fan base watches a player who possesses every reason to be vocal, fame, talent, and an undeniable pedigree, choose instead to put his head down, absorb the playbook, and support his team from the sidelines. This restraint completely reframes public perception. Shedeur stops being viewed as a polarizing celebrity figure and starts being viewed as a mature, selfless football purist committed to the long-term health of the franchise. When the time eventually comes for him to take the field, he won't be stepping out under the nervous, fractured gaze of a divided fan base waiting to see if his mouth wrote checks his game can't cash. He will step out with the absolute, unified backing of a city that respects his emotional maturity just as much as his arm talent. Act 5 represents the ultimate synthesis of this dynamic. How ego management operates as a foundational, elite quarterback trait rather than a compromise of ambition. In the traditional archetype of the American signal caller, quarterback leadership has long been mistakenly conflated with loud, unyielding bravado. The loud alpha who demands the stage, dominates the locker room through sheer force of personality, and views any concession of authority as a sign of weakness. But the modern NFL demands a far more complex psychological profile. The sheer speed of the game, the immense pressure of multi-million-dollar locker rooms, and the constant glare of algorithmic media have made emotional volatility a liability. By deliberately choosing humility over instant gratification in his relationship with Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders demonstrated that the highest form of competitive toughness is emotional control. Ego in an NFL locker room is like friction in an engine. The more of it you introduce, the more energy is wasted on heat rather than forward motion. By eliminating his own ego from the immediate QB narrative, Shedeur streamlined his own focus, turned a potentially toxic workplace environment into a stable laboratory, and proved that his psychological bandwidth is built for the long haul. This mastery over self-interest serves as a predictive indicator for sustainable, high-level success long after the initial quarterback debate subsides. A passer who cannot control his ego during off-field political maneuvering is almost always the same passer who forces throw into triple coverage on 3rd and long because he cannot stomach throwing the ball away. The psychological discipline required to sit in a press conference, deflect credit, disarm an incumbent veteran, and quietly absorb the playbook without demanding immediate recognition is identical to the discipline required to execute a game-winning drive in November. It requires delaying gratification, assessing leverage realistically, and valuing long-term outcomes over short-term dopamine hits. When Shedeur eventually assumes full control of the offense, he will do so having already passed the ultimate stress test of professional maturity. He did not let the external noise dictate his internal clock, nor did he allow the overwhelming celebrity of his own brand to warp his understanding of team dynamics. Ultimately, the stance Shedeur Sanders took alongside Watson exposes the difference between short-term posturing and long-term dominance. In a league where talent is ubiquitous and physical gifts are baseline requirements, the ultimate differentiator at quarterback will always be the mind. While talking heads argued over rep splits and debated who should hold the microphone, Shedeur executed an off-field strategy that protected his mental development, earned the respect of his locker room, and placed every ounce of developmental risk on the clock of the incumbent. He proved that true leadership is not about taking power by force, but about building an ecosystem so secure and the foundation so sound that when power inevitably transitions to you, there is no controversy left to discuss, only the steady, unmistakable arrival of a franchise quarterback who was playing the long game all along.